The first spell I ever reflected came back 10 times brighter than it should have been. The system called that impossible, and then a dead goddess answered me. I was 15 years old, standing inside a circle of chalk and silver dust, with 30 other academy candidates watching from the stone benches around the testing hall. A training spark the size of a candle flame had just struck the pale sheet of light in front of my palm. The sheet had trembled, flashed, and thrown the spark back across the hall like a white meteor. The instructor had ducked so fast that his hat flew off. A black scorch mark appeared on the wall behind him. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Then the testing crystal above my head chimed once and displayed the verdict everyone had expected before the accident. "Defensive aptitude, rank F," the examiner said. The room laughed. Not cruelly at first. Most of the candidates were nervous, and nervous people laughed when something broke the tension. Then someone pointed at the wall. Someone else whispered that an F-rank shield had nearly burned the examiner's eyebrows. The laughter returned harder. I did not care about the laughter. I cared about the words floating in front of my eyes. Mirror Testament awakened. Class, Mirror Air. Level, 1. Reflection limit, minor spark. Rule, what you understand, you may return. Rule, what you merely endure teaches you nothing. Anomaly detected. Returned force exceeded incoming force. Source unknown. Then a second line appeared beneath the first set. Do not trust the bright side of the glass. The voice that spoke those words was not the system's flat tone. It was a woman's voice, faint and tired, as if it had crossed a great distance through rain. I knew 2 things immediately. First, no one else in the hall had heard her. Second, I had heard the same voice once before, when I was 3 days old in this world and still unable to hold up my own head. That memory had followed me for 15 years. In my first life, I had been 26 and worked on industrial control systems in a city where magic did not exist. I repaired power modules, sensor boards, and the kind of machines people ignored until they failed at the worst possible moment. I had not been brave. I had been careful. I liked labels, clean diagrams, and faults that could be reproduced twice. I died because one fault could not wait. A cooling controller failed during a night shift. The emergency shutters jammed. One of my coworkers was trapped inside the maintenance corridor while the temperature warning climbed. I went back through a door everyone else was leaving through. I remember the smell of burning insulation. I remember reaching the manual cutoff. I remember thinking that I had only made one mistake. I had assumed I would have time to leave. Then I woke in a crib under a ceiling painted with tiny blue stars. At first, I thought I had survived with brain damage. Then I learned that the woman holding me was speaking a language I did not know, that the lamp beside her bed contained a captive bead of light, and that the rain outside flowed upward along the window before vanishing into silver gutters. The impossible became normal by degrees. I learned the language. I learned to walk again. I learned that magic in this world was not a miracle, but a technology made from breath, memory, and patterns of will. Children practiced simple heat marks before they learned long division. Farmers used moisture charms. Street cleaners carried wands that pulled dust into spinning balls. My parents in this life were kind, patient people with no talent for combat magic. They never knew how much I remembered. I could not bring myself to tell them that their sons sometimes dreamed about another mother, another city, another death. The only thing stranger than the memories was the mirror. When I was still an infant, my mother held me before a polished bronze plate. Babies were supposed to laugh at their reflections. Mine did not move. The reflections stared at me while I turned my head away. A woman stood behind it. She had silver eyes and dark hair cut unevenly at the shoulders. Cracks crossed her face like lines in old glass. She bent toward me and whispered one word. Later. Then my reflection copied me again. For years I convinced myself it had been a newborn dream left over from dying. Now, in the academy testing hall, the same voice had returned. Do not trust the bright side of the glass. Candidate Kaelvorn, the examiner said. I realized everyone was looking at me. Yes? Your result is complete. Please step away from the circle. I lowered my hand. The pale shield vanished. A shard of the testing mirror lay at my feet. I picked it up before anyone could stop me. For less than a second, a woman's silver eye opened inside the shard. Then, it showed only my own face. That was how my first day at Valen Academy began. It was also the day I learned that having a unique divine class did not prevent the administration from putting you in the lowest practical group. The Academy ranked combat students by what they could do safely, not by how interesting their system messages looked. My shield could reflect a spark. It shattered against anything stronger. That made me less useful than a student who could raise a wooden barrier. I was assigned to F-class defense practice with cracked training staves, padded coats, and a room whose ceiling leaked whenever it rained. Olithra found this hilarious. She was the first person in the academy who treated my failure like a puzzle instead of a verdict. She had copper-brown hair, an impatient grin, and a talent for direct force magic that made subtlety seem like an optional hobby. "You sent the testing spark through a wall," she said during our first lunch. "And they gave you F." The shield broke when the examiner tried a second spark. That part is less impressive. "Thank you. You are welcome." She stabbed a potato with her fork and leaned across the table. "Can you do it again?" "I do not know." Her eyes brightened. "Good. That is not the normal reaction. It is if you like experiments." I looked at her plate. Half of the food had scorch marks. "You call throwing magic at people an experiment?" "Only when they agree." I should have refused. I had spent 15 years avoiding situations where one mistake could kill me again. Even when I learned basic magic, I preferred diagnostic charms, alignment spells, and careful exercises with fixed outputs. Combat training made my hands cold. The memory of that maintenance corridor always waited behind the smell of heat. But the system had given me a rule. What you understand, you may return. Rules could be tested. That afternoon, we borrowed an empty practice room with walls covered in old impact runes. Olithra stood 10 paces away and formed a spark over one finger. "Small," I said. "It is small." "Smaller." She sighed and reduced it until it looked like a glowing grain of sand. I raised pale mirror. The shield appeared as a transparent oval in front of my hand. It was not solid. Light bent around its edges, and my reflection floated faintly inside it, half a heartbeat behind my movements. The spark struck. The mirror flashed. The spark flew back. Olithra stepped aside. System response followed. Reflection successful. Pattern observed. Heat bound to linear impulse. Understanding incomplete. Echo gained. 1. I stared at the words. Olithra stared at me. "Well?" "It counted." "What counted?" I had discovered early that most people could see their own system prompts, but not someone else's. I explained the echo. She immediately created another spark. "Wait!" Too late. I reflected it. No echo appeared. We tried again. Nothing. Olithra frowned. "Broken system?" "No." I thought about the wording. What you merely endure teaches you nothing. The first spark had shown me a pattern. The second had shown me nothing new. "Change it," I said. "How?" "Same spell, different speed." She adjusted the impulse. I watched carefully as the spark formed. In this world, spell structures were partly visible to trained sight. Lines of mana folded around intention like thin-colored threads. Olithra's basic spark had 2 pieces, heat and movement. Faster movement required a tighter spiral. The spark struck. I reflected it. Echo gained. 1. I laughed. I almost never laugh during combat practice. That surprised me more than the system. For the next hour, Olithra changed one variable at a time. Angle, speed, temperature, spin. I reflected what I could and let the rest strike the practice wall. After 7 successful variations, the system chimed. Minor pattern family understood. Reflection limit increased. Minor spark to basic bolt. Level increased. Level 2. My shield changed immediately. The surface grew clearer. My delayed reflection moved closer to me. Olithra grinned. "Hit it harder?" "No." "You became stronger." "I became less ignorant." That is a very boring way to say stronger. It is more accurate. She lifted her hand anyway. I lowered mine. No. Her grin faded slightly. You are afraid. The words were too direct. Yes. She blinked, perhaps expecting denial. I continued before I could stop myself. I died once because I misjudged how much danger I could survive. For several seconds, she said nothing. Reincarnation was known in theory, but rare enough that most people treated it as religious gossip. I had never told another student. Olithra slowly lowered her hand. Do you remember it? All of it. That sounds terrible. It was educational. She made a face. That is an even worse way to say terrible. I looked at the pale shield fading from my palm. The first day had changed one thing I had believed for years. I had assumed courage meant not being afraid. Olithra had made me admit the truth in less than an hour. I was afraid. I could still choose to continue. That night I placed the shard from the testing hall on my desk. Moonlight touched its edge. My reflection appeared. Then it blinked when I did not. A woman's voice whispered from the glass. 7 echoes. Better than the last one. I stood so quickly that my chair fell backward. The shard remained silent. Who are you? I asked. No answer. I moved closer. Are you the goddess who chose me? The reflection smiled. I did not. A thin line of text formed over the shard. Divine identity unavailable. Memory fracture severe. Inheritance condition unmet. Then, beneath it, the tired voice returned. Learn to return the fire before you ask who lit it. The shard went dark. I did not sleep much that night. By the end of my first week, I had broken Pale Mirror 18 times. That number sounded worse than it was. The shield did not break like glass around my body. It collapsed into cold fragments of light and left my arm numb for several minutes. The real danger came from whatever had been strong enough to break it. I learned to hate blue practice bolts. Olithra's force magic was honest. It pushed, it struck, it made sense. Blue bolts, by contrast, were designed by instructors specifically to punish lazy defenses. Their mana shell burst on contact and released a second impulse from inside the target's barrier. The first one shattered my mirror and threw me across the room. I landed on a padded mat, stared at the ceiling, and listened to Olithra shout, "That was educational!" I raised one finger from the floor. "You are becoming a bad influence." "You started it!" "I was unconscious for part of it." "You were conscious enough to complain." The system did not reward me for being hit. That rule mattered more than I first understood. Pain itself gave nothing. Failure gave nothing unless I could identify why the reflection had failed. The Mirror Testament seemed almost offended by the idea of grinding through damage without thought. So I began keeping notebooks. I drew spell structures from memory after every practice session. I marked where the mirror distorted, where my mana flow changed, and where the reflected spell lost or gained momentum. My old habits returned so naturally that I sometimes forgot I was working with magic instead of circuit diagrams. Demarin noticed during the second week. He taught magical structure, a subject most combat students considered an obstacle between breakfast and the part of the day when they were allowed to explode things. He was tall, narrow-faced, and spoke so quietly that the class usually stopped talking just to hear him. He took my notebook without asking, turned 3 pages, then looked at me. "You drew the recoil phase backward." I copied what I saw. "That is why it is interesting." He placed the notebook on my desk and drew the standard structure of a force bolt beside my sketch. A normal bolt moved from caster to target. Its recoil bled into the air around the caster's wrist. In my reflected version, the recoil did not vanish. Pale Mirror folded it into the returning spell. That explained the testing hall scorch mark. "The reflected attack is not stronger," Demarin said. "It is more complete." I felt a small chill. Complete? Most spells waste energy. Your shield appears to recover part of that waste. The system had said the source was unknown. That meant Demarin was only partly right. I showed him another sketch, this one from a heat spark that had returned with more heat than expected. His expression changed. This portion should not exist. I know. Where did you learn this notation? Nowhere. It resembles pre-collapse mirror script. I had never heard the term. He looked at me for a long moment, then closed the notebook. You should visit the archive. Because my shield is old? Because old things are rarely only old. That was how Rendavar entered my life. The Academy Archive occupied the lowest floors of the Western Tower, where the air smelled of paper, dust, and preservation salt. Rendavar looked exactly like a man who had spent too many years protecting books from students. He was short, gray-haired, and regarded every visitor as a potential source of moisture damage. When I asked for records about pre-collapse mirror script, he did not answer. He held out his hand. For what? I asked. Your fingers. I showed them. He inspected my nails. No ink, no jam, acceptable. Then he let me enter. The collapse, I learned, was the name historians gave to a period roughly 1,000 years earlier when 7 major magical schools vanished within less than a decade. Not closed, vanished. Their libraries, towers, teachers, and students disappeared from reliable records. One of them had been called Vera Academy. Or perhaps it had not. The name appeared only once in the margin of a damaged census ledger. Every direct reference I found had blank spaces where a name should have been. Rendavar watched me compare 3 books. You see the gaps, he said. They are too clean. Exactly. Someone had not destroyed the pages. They had removed specific information while leaving the physical records intact. I turned a blank page toward the light. Nothing. Then I remembered the shard. Do you have a mirror? Rendavar looked offended. This is an archive. That does not answer the question. It answers it perfectly. I eventually convinced him to let me use the polished metal plate from his desk lamp. The page was blank when viewed directly. In the reflection, faint silver letters appeared. Sanctuary of the Ninth Glass, Vera Academy. Under the patronage of Ithvera, Keeper of Returning Paths. The lamp plate slipped from my fingers. Rendavar caught it before it hit the table. He stared at the reflected text, then at me, then back at the text. I dislike interesting students, he said. Demerin said you might help. I dislike interesting teachers more. But he locked the archive door and spent the next 4 hours helping me. The name Ithvera appeared nowhere in modern religious indexes. No temple recognized a goddess of mirrors. No divine calendar listed a keeper of returning paths. Yet reflected text revealed her mark in old documents. An oval crossed by a single diagonal line. It was the same mark that appeared above my mirror testament. Ithvera. The dead goddess had a name. When I returned to my room that evening, I set the shard on the desk. Ithvera, I said. The glass became warm. System notice, divine identity partially restored. Ithvera, keeper of returning paths. Status, forgotten. Status, deceased. Status, speaking. I stared at the final line. That is not a useful combination. The woman laughed softly from somewhere behind the reflection. Useful enough. Why did you choose me? No. No? You have not learned enough to ask that question. That sounds convenient. It is inconvenient. I would prefer to remember the answer. Her voice fractured on the last word. For a moment, I saw not my room, but a dark corridor filled with suspended shards of glass. A woman walked between them with one hand pressed to a wound in her side. Then the image vanished. System notice, memory fragment unavailable, required reflection limit, elemental spell. There was my next goal. Not a prophecy, not a command to save the world. A measurable threshold. I trusted measurable thresholds. For the next month, I built my life around reaching it. The change was slow enough that nobody outside our small circle noticed at first. On the first day, I could reflect sparks. At the end of the first week, I could return basic bolts if I recognized their structure. By the second week, I could handle weak elemental spells one at a time. Fire taught me that heat was not one thing. A flame spell carried temperature, fuel pattern, expansion, and direction. Pale mirror could return all four only if I saw them separately. Cold was worse. A frost spell did not create cold, it moved heat away. The first time I reflected one incorrectly, my shield sent the magical pattern back but kept the stolen heat on my side. Olithra found me standing inside a ring of frost with steam rising from my sleeves. "You look cooked and frozen," she said. "That is because I am both." "Can I write that in your notebook?" "No." Lightning frightened me most. The smell of ozone dragged me back to my first life so sharply that my hands shook. I could see the maintenance corridor. I could hear alarms. For 2 sessions, I could not hold Pale Mirror steady enough to test even the weakest static arc. Olithra did not joke about it. She sat on the floor across from me and rolled a copper training bead between her fingers. "You do not have to reflect this today," she said. "I need the pattern. You need functioning hands more." I looked down. My fingers were trembling. "I hate that my body remembers before I decide to." Olithra shrugged. "Bodies are rude." That was such a stupid sentence that I laughed. The tension broke enough for me to breathe properly. We started smaller than planned. A static snap, then another, then a thread of blue current no thicker than hair. I watched how the mana created a path before the electricity moved. That was the key. I had been trying to reflect the visible discharge. The spell had already chosen its route by then. I shifted Pale Mirror half a second earlier. The current struck. The shield flashed. The blue thread curved back into the copper bead. Pattern understood. Conductive path precedes discharge. Echo gained. Fear response acknowledged. Understanding acquired despite instability. Bonus clarity awarded. I stared at the last 2 lines. The system had noticed fear. Not rewarded pain. Not rewarded recklessness. It had rewarded correct understanding while afraid. That distinction changed the way I trained. I stopped trying to become comfortable before attempting anything difficult. Comfort was not a requirement. Attention was. Demarin helped me formalize the idea. "Your shield is not a wall," he said after examining 3 weeks of notes. "It is a question." That sounds like something teachers say when they want students to feel stupid. "It asks the incoming spell what it is. If you know the answer, the spell returns cleanly. If you do not, your mirror guesses. And guesses badly. Usually." He tapped a page where I had drawn the blue bolt that threw me across the room. "You are trying to increase capacity. I think you should increase clarity first." The system responded as if it had been waiting for someone to say the word aloud. Hidden attribute recognized. Clarity, 12. Effect. Reduces required reflection limit against understood structures. I looked at Demarin. He could not see the text, but he saw my expression. I was right? I dislike interesting teachers. That sounds like Rendavar. I have been spending too much time in the archive. At the end of the first month, F-Class held a practical assessment in the northern yard. 6 metal training constructs hunted us between stone barriers. Their bolts were weak enough for Pale Mirror, but one machine simply charged without casting anything. My shield displayed the brutally useful message, "No spell detected." The construct hit my shoulder and threw me into the grass. Olithra knocked it sideways with a force-coated punch. "You owe me lunch," she said. "For saving me? For proving that your divine defense can still lose to a metal insect." A second construct fired at her back. I reflected the bolt, changed its angle, and sent it into the first machine's targeting crystal. Both collapsed against each other. New technique acquired. Angle return. Requirement. Destination must remain within mirror field. The result crystal later gave me an F in direct combat and a C in applied countermeasures. For once, the F did not bother me. My weakness had become clear. Pale Mirror could answer magic, not every consequence created by magic. If a spell lifted a stone and the stone hit me after the spell released it, I still had to dodge like everyone else. That night, Mirror Testament changed. Level 7. Reflection limit. Elemental spell. Clarity, 21. Class condition met. Memory fragment unlocked. The shard on my desk filled with silver light. My room disappeared from its surface. I saw a vast academy courtyard beneath a violet sky. Students in white and gray robes ran toward a tower made entirely of black glass. Bells rang in uneven patterns, windows cracked without being touched. At the center of the courtyard stood Ithvera. She looked younger than the woman I had seen in the shard, but the silver eyes were the same. Beside her was a girl about my age with short dark hair and a bleeding cut across her cheek. The girl grabbed Ithvera's sleeve. "You cannot reflect the whole event," she said. "I can reflect anything that reaches me." "Not forever." Ithvera looked toward the black tower. "No," she said, "not forever." The sky opened. There was no explosion, no fire. The world simply developed a white line from horizon to horizon. Everything above the line shifted half a pace to the left. Everything below it stayed where it was. I understood with sudden horror that I was watching space itself being cut. Ithvera raised both hands. Every window in the academy became a mirror. The white lines struck them. The memory stopped. I found myself kneeling beside my desk, one hand pressed against the floor. System notice. Historical reflection recovered. Location: Vera Academy. Time since event: approximately 1,000 years. Final outcome: unresolved. Unresolved. Not destroyed. Not survived. Unresolved. I looked into the shard. For the first time, I realized that the oldest mystery in my life might not be about a dead goddess at all. It might be about something that had never been allowed to finish dying. The memory should have frightened me away from mirrors. Instead, it made me spend even more time around them. That was one of the less sensible patterns in my second life. If something scared me because I did not understand it, I tried to understand it until the fear had a shape. Shapes could be measured. Problems without shapes were worse. Rendovar found 3 more reflected references to Vera during the next 2 months. One described it as a school for defensive theory. Another called it a sanctuary where impossible magical effects could be returned to their lawful origin. The third was a disciplinary report concerning a student who had reflected the dean's voice back into his own mouth for an entire afternoon. That final record was the first proof I found that ancient mirror magic had once been used for something other than surviving catastrophes. It also made Olithra laugh for nearly 5 minutes. "So your sacred tradition includes annoying teachers?" "I am not doing that. Yet." Demarin was less amused by the old texts. He spread copies across a classroom table one evening and circled the same phrase in each. Lawful origin. "You keep translating this as source," he said. "That is the modern equivalent." "Close, but not exact. Origin can mean where a spell came from. Lawful origin means where the consequence belongs." I frowned. "That sounds philosophical." "In old magic, philosophy was often a weapon." He pointed to the line about impossible effects. "Vera may not have treated reflection as movement. They may have treated it as assignment." Assigning an attack back to the caster? Perhaps. Or assigning heat back to fire, poison back to venom, a wound back to the act that caused it. I thought of the white line cutting the sky. "And if the original cause no longer exists?" Demarin looked at me. "That would be an excellent question for a dead goddess." I asked Ithvera that night. She did not answer. The shard showed only one new system line. Inheritance condition unmet. Required reflection limit, high magic. I began to suspect that divine mysteries were designed by people who enjoyed locked doors. The academy gave me another route to power before I could find my own. At the start of winter, every practical class received notice of the annual Crown Circuit, a tournament held across the academy's inner grounds. It was not a simple duel bracket. Students moved through controlled combat zones, solved magical obstacles, and accumulated points by defeating opponents, protecting objectives, or surviving dangerous spell environments. The best performers received access to restricted training halls and advanced spell libraries. I wanted those libraries. More importantly, The circuit would place dozens of unfamiliar spell structures in front of me under rules specifically designed to prevent fatal injuries. For someone whose class improved by understanding attacks, it was almost indecently useful. Olithra read the notice over my shoulder. "You have the expression." "What expression?" "The one you make before turning something unsafe into a spreadsheet." "I do not use spreadsheets here." "You would if you could." She was right. We entered as a two-person team. That decision attracted the attention of Braskell. I first met him in the observation gallery above the advanced practice hall. He was the Academy's director of applied magical research, though he looked more like a tired field engineer than an administrator. He wore no ceremonial robes, only a dark coat with burn marks along one sleeve. A silver brace covered his left hand from wrist to knuckle. He had been watching me reflect a rotating blade of compressed wind. I succeeded twice and failed on the third variation. The mirror broke. The wind blade cut a line across my sleeve before the safety ward dissolved it. Braskell spoke while I was still examining the tear. "You looked at the blade instead of the pressure difference." I turned. "Demerin said the same thing yesterday." "Then you should listen faster." His tone was dry, not hostile. He stepped down from the gallery and asked to see my hand. I hesitated. "Your casting hand," he clarified. "I am not proposing marriage." Olithra made a choking sound behind me. I held out my right hand. Braskell traced the air above my palm without touching it. A diagnostic pattern unfolded in pale green lines. "Interesting," he said. I had learned to distrust that word from faculty members. "What?" "Your channels do not strengthen after reflection. They reorganize. That is how clarity feels." "You have a name for it?" "My system does." His eyes sharpened. "Unique class?" "Yes." He did not ask to see the system. He only nodded. "My home city was called Asterfall," he said. I had heard the name. Everyone had. Asterfall had been erased by a mana storm 23 years earlier. Not destroyed by an enemy. Not conquered. A weather pattern of unstable magic had formed over the valley and converted stone, water, and flesh into glass-like salt. Braskell lifted his braced hand. "I was 7. This was the part of me that the rescue healers could not restore." I did not know what to say. He saved me from trying. "Defense magic is usually designed around expected threats. Walls against force, grounding against lightning, seals against poison. The problem with catastrophe is that it does not care what you expected." His gaze moved to the pale mirror fading beside me. "A defense that can answer the unknown is worth studying." That was the first time I understood what Braskell wanted. Not power in the usual sense. Certainty. I recognized the desire because I carried my own version of it. He offered me access to an advanced diagnostic chamber if I allowed his team to record my reflections during the crown circuit. I agreed. Demerin was unhappy when I told him. "Braskell is not careless," he said. "That makes him more dangerous, not less." "Why?" "Careless people stop when something frightens them. Careful people sometimes decide fear is only another variable." "That sounds like me." "Yes." I waited. Demerin looked directly at me. That was the warning. The crown circuit began 3 weeks later beneath a clear winter sky. Olithra and I entered as a team because the early stages combined obstacle fields with controlled combat, which gave me exactly what I wanted. Unfamiliar spells under safety wards. The first course fired randomized elemental attacks from moving gates. I reflected flame, frost, pressure, and adhesive water while Olithra handled the sections where stone constructs tried to solve the problem physically. During one crossing, 2 spells arrived from opposite sides. I held the first reflection against pale mirror for 1 breath, caught the second, then released them at different angles into their own emitters. New technique acquired. Held reflection. Maximum retention. 1 breath. Warning. Stored force counts against reflection limit until released. The technique was useful. Reading system messages while running was less useful. Olithra had to grab my coat before I walked into a wall. "Your invisible messages are going to kill you," she said. That would be embarrassing. Very. We finished in the upper third of teams. That was enough to enter the individual elimination field. I had no expectation of winning it. My plan was to survive long enough to see unfamiliar magic. The plan worked too well. My first opponent used sound. I had never reflected sound magic. His opening note struck Pale Mirror and shattered it so violently that blood ran from my nose. I nearly yielded. Then I realized the mistake. I had treated sound as a wave approaching the shield. The spell did not travel through air in the normal sense. It imposed synchronized vibration on whatever it touched. The second note came. I formed Pale Mirror inside my own mana field instead of in front of me. The vibration entered. The mirror caught the imposed pattern and sent it back. My opponent's next word came out in my voice. The audience went silent. Then Olithra laughed so loudly I heard her from the waiting area. Pattern understood. Imposed resonance. Echo gained. Reflection limit efficiency increased. I won when my opponent surrendered rather than risk reflecting his own stunning chord. My second opponent never cast at me directly. She raised the floor. A slab of stone hit me in the knees and dropped me hard enough to make my teeth click. I lost in less than 30 seconds. That defeat taught me more than the victory. Reflection did not solve indirect causation. If magic lifted a rock and the rock hit me, Pale Mirror saw the spell on the rock but not the physical impact as a returnable attack. I could reflect the lifting force only before the stone detached from the magical pattern. Timing mattered. Source mattered. The chain between cause and consequence mattered. Demarin made me repeat that sentence until I stopped sounding annoyed by it. Because the Crown Circuit used cumulative points, Olithra and I still qualified for the final exhibition stage. The highest-scoring students faced selected champions in controlled duels. Nobody expected us to defeat them. The purpose was to demonstrate advanced techniques and give younger students experience against superior opponents. My assigned champion was Vaskyre. That was not funny. Vaskyre was a final-year combat specialist known for one thing. He could compress a large fire spell into a sphere no bigger than an apple without losing energy. The resulting attack was classified as rank S under tournament conditions because its outer shell prevented normal wards from dispersing the heat. He was also, to my surprise, polite. We met before the match beneath the arena platform. "I watched your sound reflection," he said. "I watched your semifinal." He smiled. "Then you know not to stand still." I was planning to avoid being hit. "Excellent strategy." He held out his hand. I shook it. "Do not try to reflect my final technique," he said quietly. I looked at him. "That is unusually specific advice. The safety wards can stop the released blast. I am not certain they can stop your shield from failing first." "Then why use it?" "The judges asked for a full demonstration." There was no arrogance in his answer. He did not want to injure me. That made my later decision harder. The duel began normally. Vaskyre tested me with fire darts. I reflected them. He changed angles. I used angle return. He sent a broad flame wave instead of a projectile. I could not return the whole front, so I reflected only the section directly in front of me and stepped through the temporary gap. The audience reacted louder each time. I barely heard them. I was studying. Vaskyre's fire was unusually efficient. He created fuel structure first, then heat, then containment. Most students did heat first because flame appeared faster. His order gave him control. I gained 2 echoes, then he raised both hands. The arena changed color. Heat drew inward from the air. Frost appeared on the stone around his boots. A red sphere formed between his palms. Small, dense, terrifying. The system identified it before I could. Incoming structure exceeds reflection limit. Classification, rank S, compressed thermal event. Estimated survival of direct mirror failure, low. Recommended action, evade. I should have listened. Vaskyre had warned me. The system had warned me. My own body warned me with a pulse of old fear so strong that the arena briefly became a maintenance corridor full of alarms. Then I noticed the shell. The compression pattern around the sphere was built from the same force geometry Elytra had used in hundreds of practice bolts. The heat structure inside it resembled the flame wave I had just reflected. The rotational lock was a more complex version of the training spark from my first day. Unknown as a whole, known in pieces. What you understand, you may return. Kaelvorn! Elytra shouted from somewhere beyond the boundary. Vaskire hesitated. He could abort. I could yield. I made the decision myself. Cast it, I said. His face hardened. Do not be stupid. I know the parts. That does not mean you know the spell. No, it means I can learn it before it finishes crossing the arena. That was possibly the most reckless sentence I had ever spoken in either life. Vaskire swore. The judges signaled him to continue. He released the sphere. Time did not slow. People always describe dangerous moments that way, but mine became faster. I saw too many things at once. Compression shell. Heat reservoir. Rotational lock. Directional impulse. Safety tether. The attack crossed half the arena. I raised pale mirror. Not one shield. 3 layers. The first caught the outer compression shell. It cracked immediately. The second aligned the rotational lock. It turned red. The third received the heat. Pain drove up my arm. My vision filled with silver. Reflection limit exceeded. Clarity compensation active. Known structures, 4 of 5. Unknown structure, safety tether. I almost laughed. The one part designed to make the spell safer was going to kill my reflection. The tether connected the attack to the arena wards. If I sent the spell backward unchanged, the ward would resist because its directional identity still considered Vaskire the protected source. Lawful origin, not source. Consequence. I changed one thing. I did not tell the spell that Vaskire was its enemy. I told it that the point behind him was where its movement belonged. The mirror broke. For half a heartbeat, I thought I had failed. Then the red sphere came out of the silver fragments. It flew past my shoulder in reverse, across the arena, past Vaskire's face, into the empty impact tower behind him. The tower vanished inside a column of white fire. Silence swallowed the arena. Then every ward bell rang at once. System response. Reflection successful. Rank S structure understood through composite recognition. Major echo acquired. Reflection limit increased. High magic. Level increased. Level increased. Class evolution available. Mirror heir to Lord of Reflections. New authority. Choose destination within understood consequence path. Warning. External resonance detected. Ancient mirror network responding. My knees gave way. Vaskire reached me before I hit the ground. You absolute idiot, he said. That is fair. You could have died. I know. You knew before doing it? Yes. That makes it worse. The crowd finally found its voice. The sound came down like weather. I did not feel victorious. My arm was numb. My heartbeat would not slow. Part of me wanted to vomit from the memory of choosing danger while knowing exactly what it could cost. But underneath the fear was something new. I had not repeated my first death. Back then, I had entered danger because someone else had no choice. This time, I had chosen risk for knowledge and done everything I could to understand it first. That did not make the decision wise. It made it mine. Vaskire was declared the winner because I had collapsed and could not continue. Nobody cared. By evening, half the academy was calling me the F-rank mirror who returned an S-rank spell. The administration immediately reclassified my practical rating. Not to S, to B. I respected them for that. A single successful reflection did not remove my weaknesses. Braskel visited the infirmary after sunset. He carried no flowers, fruit, or polite concern. He carried a stack of recorded spell graphs. I liked him slightly more for that. You changed the destination, he said. Yes. Not the angle, the destination. Yes. That should require rewriting the attack's ownership relation. I do not think my class uses ownership. What does it use? I remembered Demarin's translation. Consequence. Braskel became very still. Where did you hear that? Old records. Which records? Why? He looked at the silver brace on his hand. Then he made a decision. Astrofall did not vanish in a mana storm. I waited. That is the public explanation. The storm was an after effect. Something beneath the city reflected a containment failure back into the surrounding mana field. The energy had nowhere lawful to return, so it repeated until the valley crystallized. My skin went cold. Mirror magic. I believe so. And you knew before today? I suspected. He looked at me directly. Now I know the old system can still function. The old system? The first mirror. The name meant nothing to me then. Braskell saw that. Find me when you are discharged, he said. There is something beneath this academy you need to see. He left before I could ask more. I slept badly. Near midnight, moonlight crossed the infirmary wall and touched the small mirror above the wash basin. Someone knocked from inside it. 3 soft taps. I opened my eyes. The room was empty. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up. The mirror did not show my bed. It showed a classroom lit by violet emergency lamps. A girl stood on the other side of the glass. Short dark hair, white and gray uniform, a thin cut across one cheek. The same girl from Ithvera's memory. She stared at me with the expression of someone who had been waiting far too long. Then she lifted a piece of chalk and wrote backward on a blackboard behind her. Can you see me? My mouth went dry. Yes. She dropped the chalk. For a moment, she simply stood there. Then she laughed once, covered her mouth, and began to cry. I moved closer to the mirror. What is your name? She wiped her face with one sleeve and picked up the chalk again. Zeramis. I pointed to myself. Kaelvorn. She nodded impatiently and wrote another line. What year? I told her. Her hand stopped. The chalk broke between her fingers. She stared at the number I had spoken for a long time. Then she wrote very slowly. No. I did not know what to say. She erased the board with both hands and wrote again. Today is the last day of Vera. I looked toward the infirmary door, though I knew no one outside could explain this. Zeramis, I said. Vera vanished about 1,000 years ago. She shook her head hard enough to make her hair move. Behind her, a bell rang. One note. She looked over her shoulder. Fear transformed her face. Then she rushed to the mirror and pressed both palms against the other side. The system appeared between us. Ancient reflection contact established. Temporal status, unresolved event. Contact duration, unstable. Zeramis shouted something, but the mirror carried no sound now. I read her lips only partly. Do not let him open it. Who? I asked. She struck the glass with her palm and pointed behind me. The reflection changed. For one instant, Braskell stood in the infirmary doorway, but when I turned, the doorway was empty. When I looked back, Zeramis was gone. Only one line remained on the mirror. First mirror access has begun. I left the infirmary before sunrise. The nurse objected. I promised to return if my arm stopped working, which she did not consider reassuring. By the time I reached the lower research wing, Braskell was already there. He did not look surprised to see me. You saw something, he said. A girl? His expression changed by less than a breath. From Vera? You knew that was possible. I hoped it was. That is not the same as answering me. Braskell studied me for a moment, then opened a locked iron door. Come. The stairs behind it descended far below the academy foundations. I counted 412 steps before deciding the number was not helping. The air grew warmer as we went down. Old stone replaced modern brick. Silver veins appeared in the walls, not natural ore, but channels cut with deliberate geometry. At the bottom waited a chamber large enough to hold a cathedral. There was no altar. There was a mirror. It stood upright in the center of the chamber, 30 paces tall, its surface black and perfectly still. Most of the frame was missing. Broken segments had been replaced by iron supports, cables, measuring crystals, and temporary containment rings. The result looked less like an ancient relic and more like a wounded machine under surgery. The instant I saw it, Mirror Testament opened without permission. First mirror fragment detected. Authority conflict. Inherited access, valid. Institutional access, provisional. Warning, reflected event remains active. I stopped walking. Brascal noticed. What does your system say? That you are already connected to it? Yes. For how long? 11 years. I stared at him. He walked to a railing overlooking the mirror base. A fragment was discovered beneath the academy during foundation repairs. At first, we thought it was decorative glass. Then one worker dropped a hammer. The mirror returned the sound 3 days later. That should have been enough to bury it again. It was enough to make us study it. Those are not opposites. No. He placed his braced hand against a control plate. Green lines spread through the modern supports. The fragment responds to consequences. Heat applied to one edge can emerge from another hours later. Force can be delayed. Light can appear before its source is exposed. Nothing is consistent until we identify what the mirror considers the proper destination. Lawful origin. Brascal nodded. You understand why I was interested in you. I did. That did not make me comfortable. Did the fragment cause Asterfall? Not this fragment. Another one? We found records suggesting pieces of the original network were carried across the continent after Vera vanished. Asterfall was built over one. And the containment failure? Brascal's jaw tightened. A research group tried to force the fragment to return a magical storm to its atmospheric source. The storm had no single source. The mirror kept searching for one. Each failed return re-entered the local field. The cycle accelerated. You know this technology destroyed your city. Yes. And you still want to activate it? Yes. The answer came without hesitation. I felt anger then, but not the clean kind. Part of me understood him too well. He turned to face the black surface. A knife can kill a child. That does not make surgery evil. A failed defense killed Asterfall. I intend to understand why it failed. You said you wanted a defense against the unknown. I do. You want certainty. He looked at me. So do you. That landed because it was true. I crossed my arms. What happens if the first mirror opens? If the surviving records are correct, it reconnects the old mirror network. And Vera? Unknown. I spoke to someone inside it. For the first time, Brascal lost his controlled expression. Alive? I do not know what alive means in this situation. What did she say? Do not let him open it. The chamber became very quiet. Brascal gave a humorless smile. I assume she meant me. So did she. Convenient. You think I invented her? No. I think someone trapped inside an unresolved disaster may have reasons to fear the process that ends it. That is a cold way to say it. It is an accurate one. I almost told him he sounded like me. I did not. The resemblance was becoming uncomfortable. Brascal showed me the data anyway. That mattered. He did not hide his research once challenged. He let me inspect 11 years of measurements, failed activations, containment incidents, and translated fragments from the old mirror language. Some experiments were reckless by my standards. Most were painfully careful. The first mirror was not a weapon. It was an engine for relationships between cause and effect. Modern magic treated a fireball as energy shaped into flame and motion. Vera's mirror theory added another component: responsibility. The caster caused the spell. The spell caused heat. The heat caused damage. Reflection could move backward along that chain. At low levels, this looked like sending a spell back at its caster. At high levels, it became much stranger. A curse could be returned to the intention that formed it. A magical wound could be reassigned to the spell that created it and vanish when the spell was broken. A spatial distortion could be sent back into the geometry that produced it. Theoretically, even death caused by magic might be reflected. I closed the final record. That is why Vera disappeared. Braskell nodded slowly. Perhaps. They tried to reflect the white line. You saw it? In a memory from Ithvera. At the name, the black mirror pulsed. Every instrument in the chamber chimed. Braskell turned sharply. The mirror surface became silver for one heartbeat. A woman's silhouette appeared inside it. Then a crack ran across the center and vanished. System notice. Divine identity confirmed. Ithvera, keeper of returning paths. First mirror recognizes heir. Access threshold incomplete. Required class. Lord of Reflections. I almost laughed. I have that class, the system answered. Authority unclaimed. I remembered the evolution message after the tournament. I had been too exhausted to examine it properly. Class evolution available did not mean accepted. I focused on the prompt. Mirror heir to Lord of Reflections. Accept evolution? I hesitated. That surprised Braskell. You have a choice? Yes. Why wait? Because I do not accept contracts I have not read. A faint smile touched his mouth. Reasonable. I expanded the hidden conditions. Class, Lord of Reflections. Authority gained. Destination assignment within understood causal chain. Held reflection capacity increased. Angle return becomes consequence return. Cost. Reflected force may leave residual consequence within the user if no lawful destination exists. There it was. A price. I read it twice, then accepted. Cold moved through my arm and across my chest. For a second, every polished surface in the chamber showed a different version of me. Child, old man, injured student, stranger in work clothes from my first life. Then all reflections became one. Class evolved. Lord of Reflections. Level, 15. Reflection limit, high magic. Clarity, 43. New rule. You may choose where a consequence returns, but not whether a consequence exists. The black mirror opened. Not physically. Its surface deepened until I could see a corridor beyond it. Violet lamps, white and gray uniforms, students frozen in the middle of running. No, not frozen, moving. Very slowly. A hand struck the inside of the glass. Zeramis appeared. This time, sound crossed with her. Kaelvorn? Her voice was hoarse. Yes. She laughed once in disbelief. Behind me, Braskell inhaled sharply. Zeramis saw him. Her face hardened. You. Braskell stepped closer to the railing. You know me? No, I know your machines. She pointed toward the modern supports around the first mirror. Every time you pull on the frame, our minute starts again. Braskell went still. What do you mean, starts again? Zeramis looked at me instead. The last bell rings, the sky opens, Ithvera raises the mirrors. We run. Then everything becomes white. How long? I asked. She swallowed. For everyone else? 1 minute. And for you? Her expression emptied. I remember. That answer was worse than a number. How many times? I stopped counting after the first 1,000,000. Braskell's face changed. Not enough to make him abandon his goal, enough to make him understand the cost already being paid. Zeramis continued. Most of them do not know. They reset when the reflection resets. I started remembering after Ithvera pushed me into the central chamber. I do not know why. Because you were beside her in the memory, I said. You saw that? Yes. Her eyes closed. Then you saw the line. What was it? We never learned. Braskell moved closer. Was it an attack? Zeramis laughed without humor. That mattered to Ithvera too. What do you mean? She kept asking where it came from. There was no caster, no army, no ritual circle. One moment the sky was normal. The next, the world had a cut through it. A causal event without a clear origin. Asterfall on an impossible scale. I felt the shape of the problem before I understood the details. Ithvera had tried to reflect something that had nowhere to return. The first mirror had kept it. For 1,000 years. "Can we release you?" I asked. Zeramis looked at the black edges around her image. "I do not know." "What happens if we end the reflection?" "The line finishes crossing the academy." "And if we do not?" She stared at me. "I live the same minute until your world ends." That became my goal. Not immediately. I still had questions. I still wanted measurements, records, and safer options. But the central decision formed there beneath the academy. I would end Vera's reflected minute without letting the stored catastrophe escape into the present. Braskell wanted something different. He wanted to learn how the first mirror had held the catastrophe and reproduced that protection on a larger scale. For several months, those goals overlapped. Braskell stopped forced activation tests after learning they reset Vera's minute, opened his data to us, and helped stabilize contact with Zeramis. At the same time, he continued designing a larger mirror network. I researched the same machinery because I wanted to free Vera without releasing the white line. Zeramis could speak through large mirrors for several minutes at a time. She described how everyone else forgot each reset while she remembered. Over what felt to her like thousands of years, she had mapped 3 corridors, 1 classroom, part of the courtyard, and the central chamber. Tiny changes were all she had possessed. Once, she jammed a chair under a bell rope simply to make it ring early. "Did that help?" I asked. "No, I hated the chair." That was when she stopped feeling like a historical mystery and started feeling like a person. She was sharp, impatient, and completely unimpressed by modern reverence for Vera. When Rendovar called it a legendary center of lost knowledge, she replied that the West dormitory plumbing failed every winter. When Olithra met her, they spent 10 minutes comparing bad academy food across 1,000 years. The pressure to help Zeramis made me train too fast. During one attempt at a layered gravity spell, I confused reading a structure with understanding it. My mirror failed, my weight tripled, and I hit the floor hard enough to crack a tooth. Demerin stood over me. "Why did you rush?" "Because every day I spend learning is another day she stays there." "And if you die?" I had no answer. "You have confused urgency with speed," he said. I changed my training after that. Instead of chasing raw power, I studied causal structures. Poison taught me that an effect could continue after the original spell vanished. A binding curse taught me that intention could be part of a structure. Teleportation taught me that distance was not always movement. Mirror Testament responded. Level 23. Reflection limit, high magic. Clarity, 61. New technique, causal trace. Effect, perceive active magical consequence chains within mirror field. Causal trace changed everything. Olithra's force bolt became a silver line from intention to spell to impact. A healing charm linked a healer to damaged tissue. A curse formed knots where intention and effect reinforced each other. The first mirror looked like a sun made of tangled thread. Thousands of lines entered it, almost none left. At the center was the unresolved white cut, linked not to a caster or a place, but to something my senses interpreted as outside. Braskell saw a possibility in that. If we can map the origin, we can route catastrophes away from cities. You are still planning a network? Of course. You know what this one did to Zeramis. And I know it held an event capable of cutting space for 1,000 years. The failure was the missing destination. You think everything becomes safe if you repair the design? I think abandoning a tool because its first builders failed is cowardice. The word struck because he knew fear was part of me too. And I think calling caution cowardice is how people repeat disasters, I said. He looked at his silver brace. My city died because no defense existed. Your city died because someone forced a mirror to answer a question it could not answer. Neither of us convinced the other. That was the moment our shared research became a real conflict. Winter became spring. Spring became summer. The Academy stopped calling me F-class. My official combat rating rose to A in countermeasure scenarios and remained C in direct defense. Students who had once asked whether my shield was decorative began asking me to train with them. I refused most requests, not because I had become arrogant, because familiar spells no longer taught me anything. Mirror Testament was ruthless about repetition, no new understanding, no growth. I needed unusual magic, strange structures, and effects I could not already explain. That made my training less like combat and more like research under dangerous conditions. A year after my first day at Valen Academy, I stood in the same testing hall where a spark had burned the wall. The scorch mark was still there. Olithra had bribed someone not to repair it. She denied this badly. I raised Pale Mirror while Demarin prepared a spatial fold spell at the opposite end of the hall. The spell did not travel toward me. Instead, the distance between us shortened. Causal trace lit up. I saw the relationship between location, intended destination, and displaced space. The fold reached my mirror. I did not send it back to Demarin. I returned the displacement to the empty air beside him. For 1 second, the hall became 3 paces longer on his left side. Then space settled. System response, spatial consequence reflected, major clarity gained. Level 31. Class evolution condition approaching. Required final principle, reflect an irreversible consequence. I read the line twice. Irreversible. In magic theory, that usually meant one thing, a consequence whose cause could no longer be restored or redirected. Death. Permanent erasure. A completed causal break. My stomach tightened. Ithvera's voice spoke for the first time in months. Do not make my mistake. I looked toward the testing mirror. Her cracked face appeared behind my reflection. What mistake? I asked. She placed one silver hand against the inside of the glass, believing that because I could return anything, I had the right to return everything. The mirror darkened. Then every alarm beneath the academy began to ring. The alarms were not loud in the normal sense. They vibrated through the floor, a deep sequence of pulses that made every window in the testing hall flash silver. Demarin canceled the spatial fold. What happened? I already knew where to look. Causal trace opened around me. Silver lines ran through the walls toward the foundation. Thousands of them, all tightening at once. The first mirror. We ran. Olithra met us halfway down the western stair with her coat half fastened and a force gauntlet glowing around one fist. Please tell me this is a scheduled alarm. It is not. Good. I hated the calm year we were having. We reached the lower research wing and found the iron door sealed. Braskel's authorization mark burned across it. Demarin touched the lock and swore softly. He isolated the lower chamber. I pressed my palm against the metal. Causal trace showed the locking spell as a knot of intent, command, and anchored force. Months earlier, I would have tried to break it. Now I traced the command backward. The seal belonged to Braskel's authorization. Its consequence was a closed door. I formed Pale Mirror against the lock and returned that consequence to the empty authorization slot beside it. The spell decided the slot was closed instead. The door opened. Olithra stared at me. That is cheating. It is advanced theory. You made the lock lock itself. Advanced theory. We descended. The silver veins in the walls were bright enough to see without lamps. Halfway down, the staircase shifted. 1 step became 3. The landing moved farther away. For an instant, distance folded like cloth. I caught the distortion with Pale Mirror and pushed the displaced space into the wall behind us. Stone stretched harmlessly into a shallow alcove. Demarin looked at it while running. You are going to make architecture professors very angry. That is a future problem. At the bottom, the cathedral chamber had transformed. The first mirror was no longer black. It showed the sky. Not the sky above Valen Academy, the violet sky of Vera. Thousands of old mirror channels blazed across the walls. The temporary iron supports had unfolded into a ring around the ancient frame.
Research crystals floated in the air, connected by green lines of modern magic. Braskell stood at the central control platform. His silver brace had been removed. Beneath it, his left hand was not flesh. It was translucent glass threaded with light. I stopped. He saw me notice. "Astrofall left more than scars," he said. "You have a mirror fragment inside you." "Since I was 7. That explained his connection. He had not merely studied the first mirror. Part of its broken network had lived in him for most of his life.
Zaramis appeared on the huge surface behind him. She was pounding both fists against the other side.
Kelvorn!
Her voice arrived through every reflective surface at once.
Stop him! The bell has already rung twice!
Braskell looked up at her.
The loop is changing because the network is reconnecting. The loop is collapsing, she snapped. That may be necessary. To whom?
His face tightened.
To everyone outside it.
I stepped onto the platform. What did you activate?
Only the regional nodes.
Only? Olithra said behind me. Braskell ignored her.
The line inside Vera is not random. Your causal trace proved it has an external relation. I found matching disturbances in surviving mirror fragments across the continent. The first mirror was not holding one catastrophe. It was holding the return path for every major magical disaster that touched the old network.
My mouth went dry.
Astrofall. Yes. You connected it back. I connected all of them.
Demaran moved to the nearest instrument. The readings made his face pale. Braskell, the network is treating the present as a valid destination. I know. That is not a success. It can be. Braskell turned toward the first mirror. His glass hand shone brighter. Every city protected by a node can become part of one defensive field. Any magical catastrophe entering the network can be routed away from population centers. Where? I asked. To its origin. You do not know the origin of the White Line. Then we will identify it. You are activating the system before identifying it. I am activating the system to identify it. There it was. The same circular logic that had destroyed Astrofall. The same mistake Ithvera had warned me about. You think the network will give you certainty if you make it large enough? I said. Braskell's voice sharpened. I think another Astrofall is inevitable if we continue depending on walls designed for yesterday's disasters. And how many people do you trap while building tomorrow's defense? His gaze flicked toward Zaramis. Pain crossed his face. He had not forgotten her. That almost made it worse. I can free Vera after the return path stabilizes. No, Zaramis said. The giant mirror flickered. For a moment I saw not the classroom behind her, but thousands of overlapping versions of the same corridor. Students ran through each other like ghosts. The last bell rang again. 3 times now. Zaramis staggered. Every reconnection adds another possible ending, she said. The mirror is making copies of the minute. Braskell looked at his instruments. That should increase our options. It increases us. Her voice broke. I remember all of them. Silence followed. Braskell stared at the readings. For the first time, uncertainty reached him deeply enough to slow his hand. Then the chamber shook. A white line appeared across the first mirror. I knew it immediately. The cut through the violet sky. System warning. Unresolved irreversible consequence entering active network. No lawful origin found. Network response. Search expanding. Present world registered as candidate origin. My heartbeat stopped for one terrible beat. The first mirror was about to solve its 1,000-year question by blaming us. Shut it down, I said. Braskell struck the control plate. Nothing happened. He tried again. The command is being returned. Of course. The network now treated deactivation as an action affecting itself. It reflected the command back to the control system. Olithra stepped forward. Can I break it? No, Braskell and I said together. She looked offended. I pointed at the causal lines surrounding the frame. Any magical force you use will return through the network. What if I hit it with a chair? Brascal stared at her. That is not the worst idea I have heard today. A section of the chamber wall cracked before we could test it. The white line widened. Across the academy above us, every mirror activated. I saw them through causal trace as bright nodes, dormitory windows, polished shields, wash basins, glass lenses, decorative plates. Anything reflective enough to hold an image became part of the network. Then the effect spread beyond the academy, the city, the valley, farther. The old fragments were waking. System warning, regional return field forming, rule set incomplete. All magical consequences subject to automatic reflection. That sounded protective until I understood what all meant. A healing spell used upstairs returned toward the healer before reaching the wound. A cooling charm returned heat to the kitchen stove and made it flare. A levitation platform dropped when its upward force was reassigned to the caster. The academy became chaos in seconds. Demarin looked toward the ceiling. If this expands to the city hospitals, I know. Magic was woven into ordinary life. Automatic reflection did not distinguish attack from help. Brascal's perfect defense was making intention irrelevant. He saw it too. His face had gone gray. I can narrow the rule. No, I said. I built the modern control layer. And the ancient layer is already returning your commands. I can use my internal fragment. He lifted the glass hand. I caught his wrist. What happens if it decides you are part of the network? I already am. That is not an answer. It is the only one we have. He pulled free and pressed his glass palm directly against the first mirror. Light exploded through his arm. Brascal screamed. Causal trace showed dozens of lines entering him at once. Heat, force, failed commands, old fragments of Astrofal's stored storm. The network recognized his internal shard and began using his body as a routing node. I raised pale mirror around him. The incoming consequences struck my shield. Too many. I could not return them to their sources. That would only feed the network. So I used held reflection. One breath, then another. My new class stretched the technique farther than before, but the pressure grew with every heartbeat. Get your hand off it, I shouted. Brascal tore himself free. I released the stored force into an empty section of stone floor. The floor erupted. Olithra threw up a force barrier to keep debris away from us. Her barrier immediately reflected itself. The resulting pulse knocked her backward. She hit the railing and cursed. Your mirror family is terrible! Agreed, Zeramis shouted from the first mirror. Kaelvorn, the central chamber. Ithvera left something there. What? I could never reach it before the reset. The loop is longer now. The white line had changed the timing. For the first time in 1,000 years, Zeramis had more than 1 minute. Go, I said. She hesitated. If the loop ends while I am away from the central mirror... She did not finish. I understood. Her body, if it still existed, was somewhere near the first mirror's ancient core. Wandering too far might separate her remembered self from whatever physical anchor remained. Your choice, I said. I would not order her to risk the only life she had left. Zeramis looked at the corridor behind her. Then she smiled tightly. I have spent 1,000 years waiting for a second minute. She ran. The mirror followed her perspective through every reflective surface she passed. We saw fragments, corridors splitting into overlapping possibilities, students frozen in different positions, violet lamps bursting, the white line moving across the sky. Ithvera appeared in several reflections at once. Not alive. Memory fragments. One version raised her hands toward the sky. Another argued with unseen teachers. Another stood alone before the central mirror and cried. I heard her voice through the system. If there is no origin, the return becomes the origin. The phrase repeated. If there is no origin, the return becomes the origin. That was the failure. The first mirror required every consequence to belong somewhere. When it could not find a source, it created one by looping the consequence into itself. The white line had become its own cause. 1,000 years of reflection had not delayed the catastrophe. It had manufactured an endless causal circle. I told Demarin. He understood before Braskell did. "You cannot solve a circle by finding its beginning," he said. Braskell shook his head. "Every event has a cause." "Perhaps," I said. "But the mirror no longer contains the original event. It contains 1,000 years of returns." "We can unwind them." "How?" "One by one." I looked at the network expanding across the valley. "We do not have 1,000 years." Braskell's glass hand trembled. For a moment he looked 7 years old to me, a child in a city turning to crystal while adults promised that someone understood what was happening. "I will not accept that catastrophe is simply something we must endure," he said. Neither would I. That was the trap. The choice was not between fighting disaster and surrendering to it. The choice was between ending a consequence and insisting it must always be returned somewhere else. The system displayed the evolution condition again. Required final principle, reflect an irreversible consequence. I had spent months assuming it meant I needed to find some terrible effect and send it backward. Maybe the wording itself was the test. Reflect could mean return. It could also mean understand. I thought of my first life, the failed controller, the trapped coworker, the door, the heat. For years, in both lives, I had replayed that night as a problem that should have had a cleaner solution. If I had checked another sensor, if I had moved faster, if I had known the shutters would jam, I had treated my own death like an unresolved fault. But I had died. That consequence was irreversible. No mirror had returned it. No system had corrected it. My second life did not erase the first. It came after. The event had ended. I had not. A strange calm moved through me. Not certainty. Something better. Acceptance without surrender. Zaramis reached Veyra's central chamber. The giant mirror showed her entering a circular room filled with suspended glass rings. At the center stood Ithvera, frozen in one of the oldest moments of the loop. Not a memory this time. A remnant. Cracks covered the goddess from throat to feet. Zaramis approached. Ithvera opened her silver eyes. Across 1,000 years, she looked directly at me. "My heir," she said. Her voice came through every mirror in the network. I swallowed. "You chose me." "I chose many." That was not what I expected. The goddess smiled sadly. "Most wanted the power to return harm. Some wanted justice, some revenge, some perfect defense. All failed before inheritance because they asked the mirror to make the world fair." "Why me?" "Because you came from a world where consequences existed without magic to negotiate them." I thought of machines, accidents, hospitals, storms, choices. You needed someone who knew not everything could be sent back. I needed someone who might learn it. Behind her, the white line entered the central chamber. Zaramis shouted. Ithvera lifted one hand. The line stopped for a fraction of a second. The goddess cracked further. "I made the first mirror because I could not bear loss," she said. "At first I returned arrows, then spells, then curses, then wounds. People called it mercy." Her eyes moved toward Zaramis. "When death came from my school, I believed mercy meant refusing it." "You trapped them." "Yes." No excuse. No divine speech about necessary sacrifice. Just yes. That mattered. "I erased your name," I said. "I erased my own." "Why?" "Because worship gave others access to my law. As long as people prayed to the keeper of returning paths, the path could reopen." "So you killed yourself?" "I removed the destination called Ithvera. A goddess dying by erasing the place to which worship returned. It was the most mirror-like death imaginable." Her image flickered. "I left enough memory to find an heir, not to restore me, to end me properly." The system opened. Final testament available. An heir returns what strikes him. A lord chooses where it returns.
A counter-mage decides whether it must return at all. Class evolution condition revised. Understand an irreversible consequence. I laughed once. Brascal looked at me as if I had lost my mind. What? The system was never asking me to reflect death back. Then what was it asking? To look at something irreversible and not lie about what it is. The first mirror shook. Cracks spread across the frame.
Outside the chamber, the automatic return field expanded farther into the city. We were out of time. I accepted the evolution. For a moment, nothing happened. Then pale mirror appeared around me without being summoned. It was no longer pale. It was perfectly clear. I could see through it without seeing myself. Class evolved. Heavenly Countermage. Level 32. Reflection limit. Undefined under accepted consequence. Clarity 88. New authority. 0 reflection. Effect. Sever an active magical return relation and permit the consequence to resolve once. Restriction. Cannot erase an event, restore what has already been lost, or choose a new victim. Cost. User must consciously accept the unreturned consequence within range. That last line was the entire class. Not immunity, not cancellation. Acceptance. I stepped toward the first mirror. Brascal moved in front of me. What are you doing? Ending the return. That will release the line. Yes. It will destroy Vera. Yes. Zeramis stood beside Ithvera on the other side. She heard us. Her face went pale. Brascal pointed at her. You would kill them to stop the network? No. Then explain the difference. I cannot save an event that already happened 1,000 years ago by forcing it to never finish. His glass hand clenched. That is surrender. No. Surrender would be letting the network choose another victim. I'm going to let the original consequence finish once and stop every return after it. And if the released force enters our time, I will cut that relation too. You do not know if you can. No. The word hung between us. Brascal stared. I said it again. I do not know. A year earlier, I would have hated those words. Now they felt clean. I know what the alternative does, I continued. It keeps searching forever. It turns every safe place into another possible source. Your perfect defense eventually makes the whole world responsible for whatever it cannot explain. Brascal looked at the city lines spreading through the chamber walls. He had wanted certainty because uncertainty had taken his home. Now certainty itself was doing the same thing. His shoulders lowered. What do you need? He asked. I exhaled. Access to every modern control node. He touched his glass hand to the panel. It will route through me. That may hurt. I noticed. Olithra moved beside him. What do I do? Nothing magical unless I ask. She made an offended sound. I came all the way down here to be told not to punch the apocalypse? Yes. This class is terrible. Demarin took position at the diagnostic array. I can call each return relation as it appears. Do it. The white line reached Ithvera. The goddess looked at Zeramis. Go to the central frame. Zeramis did not move. What about you? I am already an echo. You are speaking. So is a bell after the hand leaves it. Zeramis's eyes filled. Ithvera touched her cheek. You remembered when the others could not. That was not punishment. I anchored you because someone had to tell the next moment what happened in the last one. You could have asked. Yes. Anger flashed through Zeramis's grief. You keep saying that like it fixes things. No. Ithvera smiled sadly. I say it because excuses would be another kind of reflection. Zeramis laughed through tears. Then she ran to the central frame. I placed both hands against our side of the first mirror. Cold entered my bones. Causal trace expanded farther than ever before.
The network appeared not as lines now, but as relationships filling the world around me. Fire to heat, spell to caster, wound to force, fear to memory, command to machine. Astrofal's old storm to the fragment inside Brascal. Vera's final minute to Ithvera's refusal to let it end.
At the center, the white line had no beginning anymore. It was simply linked to itself. I found that loop. Zero reflection. The system asked one final question. Accept consequence without return? I thought of Zeramis. I thought of the thousands of students inside a minute that had already lasted too long. I thought of my first death. Yes. The loop broke. Nothing exploded. For one quiet second, the white line simply moved. Across Vera, through the central chamber, through Ithvera. The goddess closed her eyes. Her body separated along the line into silver dust. Every mirror in the ancient academy shattered at once. Buildings split, stone shifted. The violet sky folded along the cut. Vera finally experienced the catastrophe it had postponed for 1,000 years. But now the event had an end. The released magical force surged toward our time. Demarin shouted, "First return relation, spatial displacement to present frame." I saw it. Zero reflection. I severed the link. The displacement remained in Vera's time and finished there. Second, heat feedback through Western nodes. I cut it. Third, Astrofall storm relation. Brascal screamed as his glass hand lit from within. The old storm wanted to return through him. I caught the line. For an instant I felt Astrofall, not visually, as consequence. A city's heat, shattered wards, bodies changing structure. A child beneath a collapsed stair. Decades of one survivor asking where the disaster belonged. I could have sent it somewhere. Into the first mirror. Into the broken ancient network. Back toward the researchers who caused the failure, though they were long dead. Every option would continue the chain. I looked at Brascal. "This is the part you cannot return," I said. He understood. Tears stood in his eyes. He lowered his glass hand. "End it." Zero reflection. The Astrofall relation broke. The fragment inside his hand went dark. Brascal collapsed. Elithra caught him before his head struck the platform. "Still not punching anything," she muttered. "Soon," I said through clenched teeth. The cost was building inside me. Zero reflection did not absorb power, but conscious acceptance was not metaphorical. Every severed relation forced me to perceive the consequence without the protective instinct to push it away. My mind filled with endings. Broken spells that stayed broken. Wounds that needed ordinary healing. Objects that fell because levitation had ended. Losses that did not become someone else's loss. My knees shook. Demarin kept calling relations. I kept cutting them. The regional return field shrank from the valley to the city, from the city to the academy, from the academy to the underground chamber. The first mirror began to crack physically. Zeramis appeared behind the largest fracture. For the first time, she was not in the classroom. She stood inside a dark void with both hands around a silver frame. "Kaelvorn, I see you. The floor is gone." That was a problem. Causal trace showed her anchor. A physical body remained connected to the central frame, exactly as Ithvera had implied. But the destruction of Vera had severed the spatial relation that told the body where it existed. Zeramis was alive. She simply had no valid location. Brascal, half conscious on the floor, saw the line too through his fragment. "Give her ours," he whispered. "What?" "Destination, the frame here. Assign her spatial consequence to this frame." That was Lord of Reflection's logic. Choose where a consequence returns, but I was no longer limited to returning everything. I could choose what deserved continuation. I formed pale mirror around the broken central section, not to reflect the catastrophe, to reflect Zeramis's unresolved location. Her body belonged somewhere. Unlike the white line, she had a lawful origin and an unfinished path.
Zeramis, I said. When I pull, move toward me.
She looked into the void beneath her.
Toward the giant broken mirror? Yes. That is your plan? It is the short version. I hate the short version. So do I. I traced her spatial relation. Vera, central frame, ancient network, present, first mirror. I assigned the destination. Consequence, return. The cracked mirror bent inward. Zeramis fell. Not forward. Through. One moment she was behind glass, the next she came out of the first mirror 2 paces above the platform. Olithra looked up. Oh, finally. She released Braskel with one arm, caught Zeramis with the other, failed to balance both, and all 3 fell into a heap. For the first time that day, I laughed. Then the final causal line appeared. Ithvera. Her forgotten divine identity remained connected to my system. As long as Mirror Testament carried her authority, the first mirror had a possible destination through me. The goddess had known this. End me properly.
I touched the mark above my system. Ithvera appeared once more in the smallest surviving shard. No cracks now. No blood. Just a tired woman with silver eyes. Will the class disappear? I asked.
No. What you learned is yours.
And you?
I have been dead for a very long time, Kilvorn.
That has not stopped you from being difficult.
She laughed. For the first time, the sound had no echo. Good. I swallowed. Anything you want me to remember? Yes. She looked past me toward Zeramis, who was sitting on the floor and touching the stone as if she could not believe it stayed beneath her hand. Do not build another one. That was already my plan. Plans change. Then I will write it down. That sounds like you. I placed 2 fingers against the shard. 0 reflection. I severed the final return path. Ithvera vanished. Not into darkness, not into light. She simply stopped appearing. The first mirror broke. This time it sounded like ordinary glass.
The pieces fell inward, struck the stone, and remained there. No delayed sound, no returning fragments, no impossible light, just broken glass. The alarm stopped. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Olithra raised one hand from the floor. Can I punch something now? I sat down where I stood. No. This ending is disappointing. Zeramis started laughing. It became the kind of laughter that was too close to crying to separate the two. She pressed both palms flat against the stone platform. It is cold, she said. Olithra looked at her strangely. Yes. No, you do not understand. Zeramis touched the floor again. It is cold now, and it will still be cold in a minute. Nobody had an answer to that. The academy above us took hours to stabilize. Without the automatic return field, ordinary magic worked again. Healers treated injuries, levitation platforms rose, and the city escaped with confusion, broken glass, and several memorable accidents rather than another catastrophe. Braskel survived, but the fragment inside his glass hand became inert. The Academy Council removed him from independent control of dangerous research, and he accepted the decision. His final report ended with one sentence. A defense that automatically returns all harm cannot distinguish harm from life. I did not forgive every choice he had made. He never asked me to. Demarin and Rendevar preserved the safe pieces of Vera's theory, mostly diagnostic methods for tracing spell failures and preventing magical feedback. Vaskire sent me a note reminding me that he had once advised me not to reflect an S-rank spell. I replied that the warning was a year late. Olithra returned to ordinary combat practice and complained that enemies who did not bend causality were boring. Zeramis had the hardest adjustment. Her body was still 16, while her memory carried an impossible length of repeated time. For the first month, she woke before every hour change and waited for the world to reset. It never did. She began writing one sentence each evening about something that had happened only once. Rain began and stopped. A cup broke and stayed broken. Olithra burned soup. I lost an argument with a door. There was no romance between us. What connected us was stranger and more useful. Zeramis was proof that an ending could become a beginning without pretending the ending had never happened. I was proof, for her, that the next minute existed. My system changed after Ithvera disappeared. Mirror Testament remained, but the divine mark vanished. Heavenly Countermage, level 32. Reflection limit, adaptive through clarity. Core authorities, consequence return, held reflection, causal trace, 0 reflection. Final rule, reflection is a choice. There were no more inheritance conditions. No hidden goddess voice, no locked memories. For the first time since infancy, mirrors showed only what stood in front of them. I thought that would feel empty. Instead, it felt peaceful. A year and 3 months after my first day at Valen Academy, I returned to the old F-class practice room. The ceiling still leaked when it rained. Some traditions were stronger than magic. A group of new students were practicing basic sparks under an instructor's supervision. I had been asked to demonstrate countermeasures, but the instructor was delayed, so I waited near the wall. One nervous student misjudged a casting angle. A tiny spark flew directly at my face. My body reacted before thought. Pale mirror appeared. The spark touched its clear surface and stopped. For an instant, I saw the entire consequence chain. Student to spell, spell to heat, heat to mirror, mirror waiting for my decision. On my first day, I would have sent it back. A month later, I would have changed its angle. At the tournament, I would have studied every piece and used it to become stronger. Under the academy, I had learned the final option. I lowered my hand. The mirror vanished. The spark drifted forward, already losing structure, and went out against my coat without enough heat to hurt. The student turned pale. "I am sorry." "It is fine." "I thought you reflected everything." Once I had wanted to. That had sounded like safety. Then it had sounded like power. Then justice. Then responsibility. I looked at the scorch mark still visible on the far wall from the first impossible spark I had reflected more than a year ago. "No," I said. "Only the things that need to come back." The system remained silent. For once, it had nothing left to teach me.